Why, hello there, and welcome to this video. This is my first ever episode of my first ever show. I'm starting a Wednesday, Saturday show where I talk about politics from a progressive framework, talking about news, politics, cultural trends, whatever is going on at the moment. I'm just going to be talking about it, trying to get people to see things a little differently. But yeah, we have to jump into a pretty depressing topic right off the bat, unfortunately, because I think it would be really kind of irresponsible of me to start this whole thing without talking about the most important thing going on in the world right now, which is, of course, the Gaza genocide. This genocide has been going on for 9 long months, and it's just horrendous. I feel like this genocide, I mean, this is my first time being able to talk about it, and I'm overwhelmed with the feeling of like, how do I talk about all of this? Like, how do I try to like put this in any sort of light that's like even remotely accurate to what's going on? I mean, I feel like I could use a bunch of strong language and it just really doesn't get across how atrocious and how awful things are in Gaza right now. Personally, I've been paying attention to this from the start. This is something that I honestly am just shocked that this is still going on, that this is still happening, that right now in this today, the Gaza genocide is still happening. It's shocking and horrifying to me, and the stories that we're going to cover are not good. They're not positive, and that's what's really disturbing about it, is that it's just kind of constantly moving in a bad direction, and like we don't have really any light at the end of the tunnel. So we're going to start off with this right here. The Gaza death toll could be as high as 186,000, warn health experts. This comes from a medical journal, Lancet, and their correspondence, where essentially medical experts are trying to discuss how reporting is difficult and how things are sort of uncertain, sort of up in the air in terms of like the actual death toll of the Gaza genocide. As many are probably aware, the like reported death toll is about 40,000 people, women, children, civilians, and that is the sort of like officially reported death toll. But unfortunately, there are a lot of unknowns with this situation. There have been pretty massive bombing campaigns. Gaza is decimated. I think I read a number where it's like 86% of housing is just completely destroyed. Like it's crazy. Like Gaza is literally just rubble at this point. And you have to think, like, let's see, what's the number? So in 2022 there were 2,375,000 people in the Gaza Strip. I can only imagine like how many people just didn't get out, just didn't get accounted for, are trapped under the rubble. There are so many ways in which this stuff is being under or unreported. It's crazy. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and jump straight into the Lancet right here. I just want to read a couple excerpts from this because I think it really illustrates how they got this number, this 186,000 number, and it's really disturbing. Just to say real quick, that's like 7 to 9% of the population. That's like 10% of the population in the Gaza Strip, almost 10%. That's horrifying. That's horrifying. But let's go ahead and start right here. Collecting data is becoming increasingly difficult for the Gaza Health Ministry due to the destruction of much of the infrastructure. The ministry has had to augment its usual reporting based on people dying in its hospitals or brought in dead, with information from reliable media sources and first responders. This change has inevitably degraded the detailed data recorded previously. So what they're saying here is that they're relying on media sources, first responders, to account for the dead. And so like they're not getting numbers reported in from the military or from other sources. They are getting their information just from first responders and media sources. Consequently, the Gaza Health Ministry now reports separately the number of unidentified bodies among the total death toll. As of May 10th, 30% of the deaths were unidentified. 30% of this like nearly 40,000 number are just completely unidentified individuals. And then it continues on. Armed conflicts have indirect health implications beyond the direct harm from violence. Even if the conflict ends immediately, there will continue to be many indirect deaths in the coming months and years from causes such as reproductive, communicable, and non-communicable diseases. The total death toll is expected to be large given the intensity of this conflict, destroyed healthcare infrastructure, severe shortages of food, water, and shelter, the population's inability to flee to safe places, as well as the loss of funding to the UNRWA, one of the very few humanitarian organizations still active in the Strip. So essentially what they're saying here is that there's been so much devastation, like there are no functional hospitals, like there's nowhere for these people to go to get care there. There's been a massive famine. So there are people just like, even if the conflict ended today, the famine has done the damage. Their hearts aren't going to make it. Their bodies have been permanently damaged from this conflict. There are diseases that run rampant because they don't have access to clean water, to clean disposal of waste. They don't have that stuff. And so this continues on. In recent conflicts, such indirect deaths range from 3 to 15 times the number of direct deaths. Applying a conservative estimate of 4 indirect deaths per 1 direct death, the 40,000 deaths reported, it is not implausible to estimate that up to 186,000 or even more could be attributed to the current conflict in Gaza. So essentially, it's super bleak, but what this article is saying is that like the reporting is not there. So we probably have a severe underreporting of the actual death toll. And even so, even if we had that accurate number, it's just going to keep rising. Even if the conflict ended today, if the genocide stopped right now, if the IDF pulled back and stopped murdering innocent civilians, then there would still be death because there are children who have been starved for like 9 months and their bodies are destroyed. There are no hospitals to provide antibiotics to help treat people. People are dying of infections. They're dying of diseases. They're dying of famine. And that's not going to stop right as the conflict stops. It's not going to stop right when the last bullet is fired. It's going to stop when all the people have suffered the consequences of this conflict, which could take years. And to be real with you, a lot of it is going to have to rely on how well we're able to get aid into the Gaza Strip, especially since they've been restricting, the IDF has been restricting aid, executing aid workers, preventing aid getting to the Palestinian people for 9 months. The second that we reach a ceasefire situation, there needs to be mass humanitarian aid flooding the Gaza Strip. And even if we have that best case scenario, there are still people who it's too far gone. It's too late. It's just too little too late. All right. And sticking with Gaza, we're going to move right on to talking about the Biden pier situation, which is something that I haven't heard too many people talking about because there's the pants on fire situation happening with Biden right now where everyone's trying to convince him to stop his re-election campaign. So this sort of this story has sort of been buried underneath a lot of that. But I still feel like it's really important to talk about, especially in the context of Gaza, because as we just discussed, there's mass famine. There's no medicine. There's no hospitals. There's nothing. Gaza is an aid desert. There's just nothing. And so for that reason, we need to talk about the Biden pier. The pier was sort of like Biden's Hail Mary thing at the State of the Union address, where he finally admitted that there is a humanitarian crisis going on in Gaza, that there is a big problem. And his solution was this pier. Unfortunately, it seems like it has just been an absolute disaster. And we're going to look into that real quick. All right. So here we are with an article from Breitbart, which is right-leaning, but they're mostly reporting on this story because it is a big mess for the Democrats. Biden admitted during his NATO press conference that his plan to attach a temporary pier to Gaza to deliver aid was a failure. Now, when I first heard about this pier, I don't know anything about anything, right? Like I'm completely ignorant about how that would work, but it sounded like a good idea, sort of like attach a pier, deliver aid. Okay, cool. But as we will look into here, it kind of seems like this was just a horrible idea from the start, and that like if they had actually thought about this a little bit, then they would have realized this was just a terrible idea in the first place. So if we look at the article, we see that the pier cost $230 million and was only operational for about 20 days or 21 days, depending on the source you look at. They delivered I think it's like 7 million metric tons of food, which sounds like a lot, but it's like 1 day's worth of food for the population. And they're in a famine level event right now, so that's just simply not enough. And he announced it with great fanfare, and they basically deployed troops to try to put this pier into effect. And the administration officials are blaming this on unforeseeable weather, but naval experts say that the pier was never meant to be constructed in open sea, as it could not handle waves larger than 4 feet. So essentially what we're seeing here is that this was doomed from the start. This was just a bad idea. This was just never going to work. And if Biden had maybe thought about this or looked into it a little bit or had someone else look into it a little bit, he probably would have realized that this was just a dumb idea. And so what that kind of says to me is that like Biden didn't even care to find out if the plan that he was putting forward was going to work or not, if it was actually going to solve the problem or not. Which means that he's not taking this seriously at all. Like he's just not taking this seriously at all, which this just says a lot about like Biden probably got this idea and then like no one was willing to challenge him on it, even though it's like probably just a really bad idea in general. And I'm sure that like many people kind of thought it was a bad idea in the first place. And here we are with this failure of an idea having been implemented. And they wasted, let's see here, $230 million plus $20 million for repairs. So if you look at some other sources talking about the pier, they're discussing how they're like going to reattach it and try to get like a last push of aid in, and then they're going to take it down for good. And they're just going to give up on that. I would be kind of looking to see if there's anything else that's going to make up for this, because the IDF has been so horrendous in targeting aid workers. They're just murdering aid workers that like there's no aid getting into the strip. I mean, like we can't just send all our aid workers in and have them get executed by the IDF, because that's just not going to help anyone. But that's exactly what's happening, what has been happening. And so like this is just sort of like a lose-lose situation. The pier's not working. It was a bad idea from the start. We've tried airdropping aid, but that doesn't really do much because you can't really drop much with planes. You can't really make a difference with that. And like the best course of action would be for Biden to grow a pair and confront Netanyahu and say enough is enough. You can't genocide an entire population over this terrorist attack. You can't do it. You're not allowed to do this whole like collective punishment thing, and you're not allowed to just starve an entire population of 2.5 million people. I mean, he could have saved the 250 whatever, $300 million for this pier could have been saved, and lives could have been saved too. But no, we just have this president who is barely running the ship. He's just barely there. And unfortunately, he's not willing to stand his ground. Like, I don't know if people have been watching these press briefings that they have about Gaza and stuff like that, but it's like they just keep asking over and over, like, how many dead civilians, how many charred bodies, how many war crimes do there have to be for something to happen, for there to be literally any foot put down, for there to be any sort of actionable measure taken to stop what's happening right now. And then of course, like whoever's giving the briefing or whatever is like offended that like, oh, how dare you imply that we're okay with civilian deaths, even though there have been 40,000 civilian deaths and probably much more than that, probably closer to the 200,000 mark. But like insinuating that we're okay with a single one of those is a crime against humanity, even though we've done nothing to stop it. That's oh God. Like, I'm at my wit's end. I've seen murdered children more times than I thought possible in my lifetime. And it's horrendous. Like, you grow up learning about the Holocaust and World War II and everything, and it's horrendous. It's awful. The genocide that happened in the Holocaust was one of the most atrocious things that's ever happened in human history. And like, for me, I always thought, well, that's never going to happen in my lifetime. Like, we're past this. We've moved beyond it. This was a moment in time that'll live in infamy forever. And it's sort of like this lesson that'll like, kind of radiate throughout history, and we'll never be able to forget, because this was so atrocious. It was so horrendous. We'll never be able to like let something like this happen again. And unfortunately, that notion of mine has been disproven by this whole genocide happening right now in front of our very eyes. We get footage on almost the daily of murdered civilians, dead babies, bombed hospitals, bombed schools. It's as bad as you could possibly imagine, and worse. And like, it's happening right now in 2024, and like, we're funding it, like, as an American country. And I know as individuals, a lot of us are against the funding of this genocide, but it's the unfortunate reality that our administrative state doesn't give a crap what we think, and they're just going to do what they think they should be doing, which is apparently murdering civilians. But if you ask them about it, if you question them about it, and you insinuate that any of their actions might have led to the death of a civilian, they will be deeply offended. I promise you that. So I could go on for like a whole day about this. I could probably go on forever about this. I do think this is the most important thing happening in the world right now. And actually, it's really scary that an election cycle story about Biden being like old is like overtaking all of this, even though like they're just being civilians mulched by the IDF on the daily basis. It's it's disturbing, it's awful, and I feel like not enough people are talking about it, unfortunately. I understand that like there's this sort of fatigue that happens, and I'm like, this is my first time talking about the story, so I'm as energized as I could be. I wish I could cover every war crime. I wish I could talk about every atrocity. I wish I could bring light to this story and discuss like this whole event at large, but unfortunately I'm only starting right now, and like it's just disgusting to me that it's been 9 months and this is still happening. It's disgusting. But yeah, I could talk about this for a long time, but I probably do need to move on to the other stories in my show today. So I know that this one was kind of a downer, but I really hope that you will come back for the next couple segments, because although they are also probably downers, they will not be as much of a downer as this segment. If you have any advice for how I'm running the show or how I'm doing things, whatever, then you can leave it down in the comments. It's my show, so I'm gonna do whatever I feel like doing. If you leave some advice and you say, hey, you suck, you should dress in a fancier clothes and get a $3 billion camera and hire a sound engineer, I'm gonna tell you to shove off, because I do not have money for that. And also, I don't really care about dressing fancy. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to my next story, so I hope to see you there. Until next time, do me a little tiny favor and drink yourself some water.